February 13th, 2017, two teens, Abby and Libby, were murdered at the Moon High Bridge in Delphi, Indiana. Law enforcement asked anyone who was at the trail that day to come forward with anything they may have seen. A man named Rick Allen had been on the trails that day the girls were killed, so he went and talked to an officer. He gave the officer his phone info, told him what he wore that day, said who he had seen out there, and then he went on about his life. Allen went on about life. He did not move, he did not get rid of his guns or his clothes, and he did not hide. Days after Allen spoke with the officer, law enforcement released a photo of a man on the high bridge. The man was wearing the same clothes Allen told the officer he was wearing. So we can say it was Allen, or the photo was created to look like Allen. In the early days of the investigation, law enforcement said the person that we call Bridge Guy in the photo is responsible for the deaths of Abby and Libby because he is the only person that did not come forward saying he was on the trails that day. They say the report of Allen coming forward got misfiled and misplaced, and that's why he was off the radar for 6 years. So for 6 years, Allen's report was filed away, misplaced, hidden by the FBI, and right before the election, it magically reappears. I wonder who found this tidbit of information. Would it possibly have been a good old boy named Tony Liggett? So whose job is it to take the info and make sure it gets to the right place, or that it's followed up on as it should be?
I'm the guy that reviews every report that comes to the sheriff's department and basically approves it. Is there more follow-up that's needed? What else needs to be done? I'm that guy that does it, and I'm the first one to kick it back and say, no, you need to do more. You need to do this. And they take what I say and they go do it. I hold them accountable as it is. That's what they want.
Who was it who discovered this tidbit of information hiding away in some file by the FBI right before the election? Would it be a good old boy named Tony Liggett? Tony Liggett also served the search warrant and wrote up the probable cause for Richard Allen. I guess he considers himself to be an FBI, that good old boy, since he said FBI is the one who misfiled the report when it was his job. It's a fact that corruption involving police officers in Indiana who engage in illegal activities such as human trafficking and other forms of corrupt behavior, as well as efforts to conceal such crimes, have occurred in the past. Here's a few recent examples. In 2020, an Indianapolis police officer was charged with battery and official misconduct for using excessive force against a woman during an arrest. In 2019, two Muncie police officers were charged with several crimes, including theft and obstruction of justice, for allegedly stealing drugs from the department's evidence room and planting them on suspects. In 2018, an Indiana State Police trooper was fired after being accused of offering to help a woman get her driver's license back in exchange for favors. In 2016, two former Lake County Sheriff's Department officers were sentenced to prison for stealing money from a suspect during a traffic stop and then covering it up. It's also a fact that there has been situations where police officers have planted evidence or falsified search warrants without probable causes in Indiana in the past, which is a serious violation of law and police code ethic. Such action undermines the integrity of the criminal justice system, can result in innocent people being wrongfully convicted. The good old boys in Indiana refers to a group of people who are typically white male and hold position of power and influences in the state law enforcement or political system. It is known that there are some of these good old boys who engage in corrupt practices and favoritism, which gives them an unfair advantage over others. In 2013, an officer was sentenced to 30 years in prison for taking bribes to protect a drug dealer. In 2015, several officers in the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department used falsifying search warrants to seize cash and property from citizens without probable causes. In 2017, a former Lake County sheriff was sentenced to 15 years in prison for accepting bribes and kickback in exchange for contracts and favors. While there is proof that there is corruption in law enforcement, it's important to note that these incidences do not necessarily implicate all law enforcement officials in the state. In 2020, a Fort Wayne police officer was charged with distributing and possessing child abuse material. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. In 2017, an officer was sentenced to 10 years in prison for trafficking drugs and guns. In 2016, a former Indiana state was sentenced to 15 years in prison for smuggling drugs across the state line. In 2017, there was a murder of two teens, Abby and Libby, in Delphi. There has been rumors and speculations that suggest a law enforcement officer may have been involved in the crime. Why is it these crime reports go unnoticed? It's difficult to determine the exact number of cases involving total corruption in law enforcement, such as cover-ups and incidences are often kept hidden and difficult to uncover. There are high-profile cases throughout history where law enforcement officials have engaged in extensive cover-ups and corruption to protect themselves or other colleagues. For example, Watergate scandal in 1970 and Los Angeles Police Department in 1990s, where officers were found to engage in widespread corruption, including planting evidence and falsifying police reports. These cases highlight the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of transparency and accountability in law enforcement. Again, it's important to note the vast majority of officials that are dedicated to public servants who uphold the law and work to protect their communities. But there are bad apples. What would be the motive for law enforcement to do something like this? Abuse of power, mental illness or health issues, accidental killing.
You want to come up front?
Place where they told you what to chase, told you how to run the race. Every move was on the page, but I didn't like their way. Had to fight and misbehave.